Namaskar. Welcome to another episode of Editorial. One nation, one election is what Mr. Narendra Modi says he wants. क्यों रखने का different elections when the country is one? This is what he asks. Let's understand this concept of one nation, one election. Let us understand this concept of whether it is going to be helpful for us as citizens of this country or not. Let's understand that. Let's kind of clinically study it and then you decide whether it is good for us or not. ठीक है ना? Let's get right into the show. अच्छा, for starters, the first thing what we need to understand is India used to practice one nation, one election. Our first general election happened in 1951, ended in 1952. So, a lot of people who say that Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel was supposed to be the Prime Minister and then Gandhi got him out and made Nehru Prime Minister and all that. You see, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel passed away in 1950 and our first general election was in 1951-52 and that election saw Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru as our first Prime Minister. Anyway, theek hai. So the first Prime Minister, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, 1951-52. From 1951-52 to 1967, that is the fourth Lok Sabha, we saw one nation, one election. Acha, while I say that, let me also add that you see, as early as July 1959, Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru wanted to dismiss the Kerala state government headed by EMS Namboodiripad. He wanted to dismiss the first ever elected communist government, by the way. That was the first ever elected communist government in the world. He wanted to dismiss that in 1959. But that being said, technically speaking, let us simplify matters like we normally do. Till 1967, India saw one nation, one election. 1967 ke baad, that is 1968, 1969, we saw some assemblies being dissolved, state assemblies being dissolved, and therefore, the concept of one nation, one election got completely decoupled. Now, there is also an instance in December of 1970 where the then Prime Minister, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, had called for dissolution of the parliament in 1970 and called for a premature election in 1971. The election which was supposed to happen in 1972, she called for a premature election in 1971 and this absolutely decoupled the central election, Lok Sabha election with the assembly elections. This is the story. So, long and short, till 67, it was all happening one nation, one election. After 67, 68, 69 onwards, the elections got decoupled. So, you had assembly elections separately, you had central elections, Lok Sabha elections separately. Theek hai na? Okay. I also spoke to you about right in 1959 when Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru wanted to sack the communist government of Kerala and all of that. So, this is history. Now, Narendra Modi, since 2014, was always advocating this concept of one nation, one election.
कि देश ने बार बार चुनाव इस देश की प्रगति में रुकावट बन रहे हैं, गतिरोध पैदा कर रहे हैं. आज कोई भी योजना को चुनाव के साथ जोड़ देना आसान हो गया है क्योंकि हर 3 महीने 6 महीने कहीं न कहीं चुनाव चल रहा है. कोई भी योजना जाहिर करोगे आप तो मीडिया में देखेंगे चुनाव आया तो फलाना हो गया, चुनाव आया तो फलाना हो गया. हर काम को चुनाव के रंग से रंग दिया गया है और इसलिए देश में व्यापक चर्चा हुई है. सभी राजनीतिक दलों ने अपने विचार रखे हैं. एक कमेटी ने बहुत बढ़िया अपना रिपोर्ट तैयार किया है. वन नेशन वन इलेक्शन के लिए देश को आगे आना होगा.
Now, let us understand some advantages and disadvantages of one nation, one election. Because one nation, one election, you can't in one shot say that no, it is bad for the country or good for the country. I think that is not the way one should view it. If we have to do a SWOT analysis. So let us look both. Let us look at the strength and weaknesses of having one nation, one election. And like I told you, later on you can decide what is right and what is wrong. You see, when you have multiple elections, almost 1 or 2 or 3 elections per year, year after year, so the attention of the government gets diverted all the 5 years in elections. Bad. That is bad. Secondly, every year election, paisa kharcha hota hai. Lot of money. You see, if you do it all together, the expenses comes down drastically. But every year you set up your whatever EVM machine, you set up your infrastructure, you set up your government officers, you pay them, you get them there, travel, stay, food, infrastructure, etc., etc., etc. It goes from the taxpayers' money. So a lot of money can be saved if the election is done in one shot. Thirdly, political the corruption. Every election, what do you think happens? Humongous amount of corruption. Do you think the candidates actually spend the kind of money that election commission earmarks? Is that what they do, you think? So, a huge amount of money is spent on elections. Huge amount of money. And there is huge amount of corruption that happens during elections. This can be curbed. One shot mein khatam ho jayega. This can be curbed. So, corruption is another issue. The fourth issue is, you see, the entire voting process can be simplified. ठीक है ना? Voting process can be simplified because you have state elections, you have central elections. Now I'll tell you how this one nation, one election happens. One nation, one election mane, you have two phases. Phase 1 is where you have the Lok Sabha election and the assembly elections together. And phase 2 is when you have panchayat election, municipality election within 100 days of your state stroke central election. So this is how in two phases you have one nation, one election. So एक साल में सब हो भी जाएगा and the fact remains that you have all the elections that happens simultaneously. This is what one state, one election means. So the fact remains that it simplifies the process of election in totality. ठीक है, चलो. Now this is one end of the story. Now the next is what are the disadvantages of having one nation, one election? What are the disadvantages? You see, the first disadvantage is I vote for one particular political party. And that political party starts thinking that they are non-biological, for instance. I mean, I'm just giving an example, non-biological. They think they are God. They think that everything is now under their control. They are the supreme controller of this country. How do I teach him a lesson? How do I go back and tell this government, a government who may not even listen to you, how do you go back and tell the government, no, what you're doing is wrong? The way I have is to ensure that when my state election comes, vote against him. Vote against that government. That is the way I will show that government, the central government, that you were wrong. Your governance in the center is not right. That's the way I can show him. That's the advantage of having elections every year or possibly state elections different to the central election. Biggest advantage. Biggest advantage. The second advantage is a lot of political parties, especially political parties that works the presidential style of election, wherein you have one supreme leader who you present as a supreme leader, as the ultimate leader. Once upon a time we had Indira Gandhi. Now, of course, we have our good Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi. Supreme leaders. बाकी सब भूल जाओ, मेरे नाम पे इलेक्शन में मेरे नाम पे वोट दो. See, for these supreme leaders, it is very easy to conduct all elections together. You know why? Because I will tell you a consumer psych in this. A consumer psych. A consumer psych is that if you are buying a Sony television, chances are the adapter that you will buy for that television will also be Sony. Multiple brands are not very easy for a consumer as consumer preference. So there is a chance that if you are voting for Congress or you are voting for Bharatiya Janata Party for your national election or for your Lok Sabha election, the chances are the next button that you press in your EVM machine for assembly election will also be Congress or Bharatiya Janata Party. It is very rare that you will press Congress for Lok Sabha election and then go back same day, same time and press Bharatiya Janata Party for your assembly election. It is not that easy. It is rare. From a consumer preference point of view, it is rare. If you give gap, that means today I press Congress and I vote for Congress, and after 1 year, 1.5 years, if I have to vote for my state election, I will then, like I told you, remember, Congress didn't do well, no, so I'm going to vote for BJP. That happens. But simultaneously, it is very difficult that I have two minds and wo hota nahi hai. In more often than not, wo hota nahi hai. And especially in markets where the political understanding is not very entrenched in depth. That is the point. So these people, more often than not, like I told you, prefers one nation, one election. So that Modi wave, and he captures everything in that wave. Tomorrow, if there is a Rahul Gandhi wave, then Rahul Gandhi will capture everything in that wave. If there is a Arvind Kejriwal wave, then he will capture everything. If the Mamata Banerjee, so that wave with that popularity, they capture everything. That is why some people who think they have that kind of popularity prefers one nation, one election. Now, the last thing I want to talk about. The last thing is, in fact, no, second last thing I want to talk about before I tell you the details of how actually this can be achieved, this one nation, one election can be achieved. The second last thing that I want to talk about is, I wonder, why is our government pushing for one nation, one election? By one election, which is the Lok Sabha election, they do it in 7 phases and 8 phases, one general election. That they have to do 7 phases. So then why add another Lok Sabha, why add another assembly election phase? Why add load to the already loaded election commission? Because election commission is loaded. That is why, loaded, workloaded, of course. Election commission has got a lot of workload. That is why they bifurcate the election in 7 phases and 8 phases and all of that. Otherwise, they would have finished it in 1 or 2 phases. But no, they have in 7 phases and 8 phases and all of that. No, if it is so overloading, you are also asking them to now handle assembly election. So, will it actually help or harm the system? That's a question I want to ask the government, because that is what we have been seeing all this while. So that question also needs to be answered. Now this is the pro and cons of one nation, one election. The last point which I want to make is the process in which you can do, which is very important for my viewers to know, the process in which you can make this entire one nation, one election work is by amending the Representation of People's Act 1951. Process 1. Process 2, the bill must be passed in the parliament with 2/3 majority. That I'm sure you know, for that to become an act. Process 3, 50% of the state must pass the bill. 50% of the state in India must pass the bill. And process 4, 5 articles of the constitution must be amended. Which are those 5 articles? The 5 articles are Article 83, duration of the House of Parliament; Article 85, dissolution of Lok Sabha by the President; Article 172, duration of the state legislature; Article 174, dissolution of the state legislature; and Article 356, imposition of President's rule in states. So you have to amend these 5 articles, and you have to ensure that 50% of the states pass the bill and make this into an act. And of course, you yourself, the assembly, the Lok Sabha, has to get the bill passed and amend the People Representation Act of 1951, amend that act and pass a new act. Only then pass a new bill so that it can be an act. So only then can this happen. This is the long and short of one nation, one election. My last point is, it is always better that people have a choice to punish the government that they have voted for if the government does not perform. And the best form of punishment is to ensure that you are there in the center, you remain in the center because we voted for you, but I will show you that you are not doing well through my state election. That is the best way for a common citizen, a common voter whose vote today also doesn't matter. Whose vote today also doesn't matter because he may vote for some particular party, that some particular party may tie up with another party, and that party may tie up with the fourth party, and all the three put together would form a fifth party, and then they form a government. So my vote is, that's the value of my vote today. Under these circumstances, I would at least like to know and understand and be aware of that if the central government doesn't perform the way I wanted the central government to perform, for which I gave the central government vote, I have my assembly elections to teach them a lesson, to tell them that, listen, you know what, you're not doing well. That right I will have. This one point, this one factor, I think overrides every other factor in my mind. This is my opinion. Please form your own, and please let me also know. This one factor in my mind overrides all the other factors. That to me would be true democracy. Till I see you next time, that's tomorrow at 10. Namaskar.
Stay ahead with our cutting-edge news app. Instantly access the latest shorts in just 1 minute and breaking news in just 50 words. Download now for a smarter, faster news experience.